Hello everyone. Hello, let me know when the sound comes through. Welcome to this evening's natter. Hello, hello. The birds are singing. It's been quite sunny today outside. Oh, man. I hope everyone's well. Yeah, I'm zoning out of life a bit at the moment. Work. Don't overwork yourselves, folks. You burn out and it's not good for you. Hello, out of curiosity, did anyone get a bit of weird... Was there any weird... Did any intro music play just there? Or was it fine? Did we get away with it? Just out of curiosity. Because I was definitely mildly breaking the tech. Right. While you think about answering that question, what's happening today? Well, we're going to be talking about electrification, but before we do that, before we talk about electrification, before we go through that report... And while my voice, which you can tell I've not spoken basically at all today because my vocal cords are very tight. Sorry, I'm just having a sip. Let me first of all... Well, I'll tell you what, first of all, let's go through the... Well, it's not the news to start with. First of all, we're going to be going into looking at our trends... our transport trends. It's interesting. I don't really know what's gone on though. Any suggestions for what's been going on the last well, when was it? A couple of weeks ago. Really strange. Let me just do this. This bit here. This is obviously a bit weird. I don't know whether it's because I don't know. It's a bit strange. I'm presuming it's going to shoot back up again. But also you'll notice a tremendous drop in road ridership as well there, and also cycling goes up and down all the time. Buses seem pretty stable, so I'm not sure what's going on. It's all a bit weird. I don't know whether it's an eccentricity of like season tickets changing at the end of... I'm not entirely sure. It's a bit weird. Anyone who's got any ideas, if POGs or SW lines are out there with an interest, then Easter, presumably there'll be an element of sort of holiday in there, but I'd have thought... Anyway, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Like, as I say, I'm looking forward to... Every 2 weeks, I'm looking forward to seeing what the what the start of May comes out as, and we have to wait for another 2 weeks before we get those, because the trains looked busy when I was out and about. They really did. So, yeah, people have asked... I'll try and keep this... We'll kind of try and do this every week, because it is interesting to sort of follow that trace. Yeah, let's see what happens. It's all a bit strange, but... So this is to remind anyone who's not kept up to date. This is the target that industry leaders said. No, this is a genuine. I don't know what they had. I have no idea why that's a very bizarre spike down. But given I don't know. Given that this is relative, this is relative, not absolute figures. So this is just in relation to this time last year. I don't know whether it's because of where the bank holiday has fallen. The Easter weekend fell. I don't know. The Catholic Church make up when Easter is, don't they? They just decide whenever it's going to be based on absolutely nothing. So maybe that's why. Anyway, so that's that. Hopefully insightful. We'll keep following that as we go forwards. You'll have noticed that in the Scotsman today, or you may or may not have noticed the Scotsman online today. Alistair, I had a good chat with Alistair earlier in the week about this. HST crashworthiness. So off the back of last week's Rail Natter, essentially, it piqued Alistair's interest, and in fairness, a lot of people have been unfairly saying, "Oh, Alistair likes to just drive the knife into ScotRail whenever he gets the chance." In this instance, no, absolutely not. When I was chatting on the phone, Alistair was quite well understood the fact that this is not really ScotRail's fault or issue. This is Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government's issue. They made the decision to go with refurbished short-form HST sets rather than procuring new trains. That decision was made. It was made for a variety of reasons, a huge number of different reasons, but it was a decision that was made, and those consequences, the consequences of that are that we have a less than ideally safe train going around. So David, thanks for that. I know people, I don't go on Facebook because it's a horrible mess all the time, so I'm never on there, but I did spot that there were a few forum-like things getting angry about this. But the reality is that it's irrefutable. The HST is not a crash-worthy vehicle by modern measures, and so justifying its continued existence requires us it requires some solid justification. I've yet to see that. Anyway, so that's the discussion of that, and a lot of people, there's been some bad faith arguments going on about about the fact that I brought up energy dissipation in the last episode. I only did that because that's the only measure we have at the moment, so it's a relative scale. That's sort of arguing about that is just distracting from the fact that the evidence is incontrovertible that these do not match. They don't have any modern crashworthiness features at all, either the Class 43 power car or the Mark III coaches. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell on that. Plenty of discussion about that online at the moment. So, next thing, some pretty tragic news coming out of Mexico City. That was around 20 people have been killed as a result of a collapse of a bridge on their metro system. Pretty shocking, to be honest. That was when was that? Was that on the 3rd of May, I think? So that was a few days ago. Absolutely appalling scenes, really. Shocking. It appears that there were already complaints about the construction quality, so that there are some suggestions that there were already issues that have been reported about this bridge, and so I don't know. We await the report to see what's happened, but pretty appalling scenes there. Right. So next, okay, let's. There isn't going to be much news. There's going to be Ella, is it worth discussing the extremes of design? Yeah. So the two extremes of design generally are on. I'll tell you what. Let's get Big Face up. It's my framing because I was on a Zoom call with North Sound Radio earlier. There we go. Let's just correct that. There we are. That's better, isn't it? Hello, everyone. Oh, the lighting's looking quite fresh for once. I don't look quite as pink as normal. What was I going to say? Sorry. So on the one hand, you've got like the American sort of side, which is you build everything of absolute. You build everything completely rock solid. But that's not necessarily a good thing for crashworthiness either. On the other side, you have the Japanese approach, which is to just have zero crashworthiness in your vehicles at all, but design your system such that you don't crash vehicles into each other or off the tracks. The European approach is somewhat of a compromise of the two. We don't go for the American pig iron approach. We don't assume that we can create crash-free railway systems. So those are the two extremes. I know there are quite a few people who advocate for the Japanese model for things like High Speed 2, but I vigorously oppose that for a variety of reasons, not least that the stock that runs on HS2, which you could potentially design to be entirely is being designed as a zero crash system, is having to run onto all those trains will have to run onto the existing network, which runs on old infrastructure, which doesn't necessarily have the ability to conform to that. So, so there we go. Anyway, right. So I'm not going to dwell on this because there's been enough discussion about that already. I think let me first of all whiz back to whatever I was on about here. So let's get rid of my face entirely. Why electrify railways? Well, this is a report that was released by the Railway Industry Association very recently. When was it? It was like 3 weeks ago, I think. Maybe not even that, 2 weeks ago. It was released. It kept getting delayed because news things kept happening, and then it got delayed. But then it ended up coming out on Earth Day, which is quite good. So we're going to I wanted to pick through this because it's brilliant. There's loads of really good data to pick through, lots of really good information in there, and I think it's worth us. I mean, I know I go on about electrification a lot, but it feels like a very important subject, and the more that all of us who are watching this are familiar with the key arguments, the more that all of us can make those cases to our MPs, to people within the industry, to people outside the industry, however we're representing this case, it's good for us all to kind of go through it. And you might have questions. I'll try and explain. I'm not an electrification engineer. Gary isn't with us. You might be wondering why he isn't. Why I haven't got anyone else on to talk about this one. Well, partly because I want to be able to say, partly because Gary being on means that we have to be more politically careful because he's better paid than I am, so he can get told off more loudly than I do, and has to be more less partisan, shall we say? But also partly because Gary's going to be coming on to talk about discontinuous electrification at some point soon. So yes, so that which I think will be interesting, which I do want Gary on to talk about because he's very passionate about that subject, as am I. So that's what we're going to be talking about this time, and I think basically I need to just crack on essentially. Before we talk to the report, I will sort of talk briefly about. We'll remind ourselves on the state of play of kind of what the discussion is and where we're at and why things are being delayed and blah blah blah. Chuck your questions through. This might end up being quite a short one, so there should be plenty of time for questions. Gary Keener is here. Hello, Gary. You're in the chat. I hope I'm making your representations about you accurately. Your ears are burning. Anyway, enough of that. Right, let's crack on. Send all your questions. For those who are new to RailNatter, if you @me in, if you type @ and then type my name, it'll appear. You can click on it. It appears nicely in red in the YouTube chat, and I can follow that. It makes it easier for me to spot your question. So if you've got a question, if you @ my name into it, it means I can tell whether you're talking to me or whether you're talking to each other in the chat. It makes my life a bit easier. Right. Without further ado, welcome to tonight's RailNatter. As the Intercity 225 fades away, I'm reminded that I need to remember to switch off cursor being represented in OBS. Anyway, because yes, Ella, thanks for sending those instructions. So right, the @ function doesn't work on mobile. Anyway, don't worry about that. I think it vaguely does. Right, what am I on about? Yeah, I'm putting up this picture of the approaches into Liverpool Lime Street, which has electrification in it. I like it because there's a variety of different electrification kit in here. I just like this picture. Also, the scale of this picture is awesome. And the approaches into Liverpool Lime Street are really cool. Also, some S&T down here in the corner, which is quite funny. Let's make my face appear in the corner. Hello, everyone. I'm in the corner. So, I'm going to press this button here. Here's a picture of electrification. Electrification is good for a variety of reasons that we're going to explore in the report, but I just wanted to put this picture up because I like this picture. I thought I'd summarise the state of play. Let's remind ourselves of the state of play, shall we? Firstly, okay, the broader picture is that we know that, we go back, let's make my face large, actually, briefly. We know that, because I was working on those projects when they were announced, it was very exciting. Back in, whenever it was, early 2010s, lots of electrification was announced. New labour had been absolutely useless on new electrification. There just hadn't been any. A load of electrification they'd sort of started instigating it, and finally electrification projects started going online. There was the idea there's going to be this grand sort of thrust of electrification, and there did feel at the time like if the start had been a success, it might start rolling on into becoming a rolling program of electrification. And then a couple of projects went horribly wrong but mostly because of horrible failed project management and essentially creating a load of contrived time limits, which meant everything fell apart. And in fact, if you want to read about exactly what I'm talking about, then let's go miniaturized face, because the re-electrification cost challenge went into great detail about what all those problems were. And so throughout that period, from like 2014 to 2019, we had a load of electrification projects. Loads of them, quite a lot of electrification projects happened and were fine, and no one talks about them. But as a result of particularly Great Western electrification becoming problematic, the government bottled it and decided to just can the whole lot off rather than, understanding the problem and continuing with it, because the numbers don't radically change because one project's going wrong. But anyway, the re-electrification cost challenge is almost the precursor to the report we're going to talk about tonight, which is fantastic, well worth a read. Lots of things in there get repeated, actually, in this one, but this report sort of evolved some of these ideas, and it's oriented slightly different. Re-electrification cost challenge was addressing the key thing that government was afraid of, which is the idea that electrification would just cost a frightening amount of money. Whereas this report is kind of catching a bit more in amongst it. So that was the re-electrification cost challenge. Following that, we had, we've had constant representations of government saying, for God's sake, get on with it, start a rolling program moving. We are shedding the skills that we developed, that we had lost previously. We developed all those skills, and we are now losing them again if you don't kick things off. And we are now losing those skills, by the way. It's too late for us to not have shed people out of the industry. We already have. So the next report that came out was Network Rail's Traction Decarbonisation Network Strategy, which we haven't seen the last version of, by the way. This is the interim version. I'm so glad that this got out into the public domain. so that we could pick through it. And indeed we did for that goodness knows how long, 2-hour-long episode where we picked through it. So I'm not going to do it again, but I'm going to go through a reminder of what that said. What did that document say? Well, it said this. These are the key conclusions, which were that of the 15,400 single track kilometers that there are in the network, only 15% of those single track kilometers are suitable for alternative types of traction. The vast majority, 85% of it, 13,000 single track kilometers, require conventional electrification. No bones about it. They just require conventional electrification. It's a very good point, actually. Where are we? What was Gareth Williams just... Oh, no, sorry. Not Tom Sedgman. No, this is why you have to at me in, because I can't spot the message I just saw that's now disappeared again. Someone pointed out, is there stuff being done now? Actually, there is. So firstly, Scotland is kind of starting to slowly progress with electrification. Their electrification I don't think there are any shovels in the ground at the moment, but they're kind of probably pushing designs that were in outline phase into later design stages before progressing. Gary might be able to answer on some of this stuff as well in the chat. In the rest of the UK, there is some valleys electrification happening-ish at the moment. I don't exactly know what stage we're at with that. I don't know if there are a few people who are keen on the Welsh infrastructure who might be able to answer that. In terms of England, there's only one bit of electrification going on if you ignore Crossrail, and that is actually Crossrail's electrification is all done, actually, isn't it? Because it's all energised, so that you can't count that. The electrification that's going on is near me, actually. It's past Colton Junction. Everyone should know about that, which is electrification running from Church Fenton up to York, up to Colton Junction, essentially, which is allowing... I think the main point of it is to allow the Transpennine Express trains that run south, the bimode trains, to have their pantographs up as they come through and out of York, because they take an almighty performance hit when they're running on diesel only, and particularly up that bit, and they get caught up by the trains behind them. So I think that's probably a factor in it, but it is largely part of a bigger picture of Transpennine electrification, which is a good thing. Gary Keener points out that Scotland are already piling for East Kilbride. Well, if they're doing things in the right order, that means designs are finished and it's all happening, which is excellent. Which means the design team will be moving on to the next thing. It's a rolling program, folks. It's how all this stuff should be delivered. Anyway, right. Enough of me waffling, because it's already 7:20. Oh, yeah. So the TDNS, as you all remember, it had all these little maps which fed into the big map, which explained where things need to happen. And you can see most of that's green. The yellows are for potential battery operation, and the purples are for potential hydrogen operation. Graham Harris, yeah, good point. Kettering to Kettering Market Harbour. Is that actually progressing at the moment? What's included in the question mark making up the 2%, Anthony O'Brien asks. Good question. The red question mark at the end there is kind of undecided, could go either way. There's some stuff where you'd basically need to do a more rigorous kind of assessment to understand exactly what you do there. So that's the big map. What it requires is... firstly, we're going to see this again. This is Noel Dolphin's graph of showing how kind of the peaks and troughs. And this is useful for a variety of reasons, not least because it allows us to get an understanding of scale, which is if we want to deliver this by 2040, which is obviously my preference, we need to be delivering an average of 660 single track kilometers every year. And we peaked at 580, I think, in 2018 during Control Period 5. I don't know whether this went up in 2019 and was higher. I'm not sure. It could have been, actually, because quite a lot did seem to get signed off all at once, actually, there. So, actually, Gary, you've got a far better version of this graph now, haven't you, in really granular form. So you might be able to confirm that. Anyway, the point being that 660 is pretty high, and our supply chain, the industry as it is now can't deliver that. So it can't deliver that in one hit. We need this to be part of a broad program. So that's why I put this little slide up. Right. So now it's gone black. What I mean by that is what's going to happen is we're going to get the report up. Before we get the report up, though, there's an open letter that was sent to Grant Shapps that's kind of potentially worth picking out very quickly. There's basically a load of signatories going, yes, do this. It's a good idea. There's the PWI with their slightly weird logo. PWI, get yourselves an on-white logo, please, please, please. And essentially this report, they kind of talk about, there's an executive summary and blah, 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 and that they've included. Basically, it's just kind of making this case. Felix Schmidt, pleased to say, kind of introduces the report, as we'll see in a minute. basically, this letter essentially summarizes what the report is, and we're going to go through the report. It's 7:20. So here it is. It looks very shiny. Oh, for those not sure about single track kilometers, thanks Lewis and Gary for pointing that out. Single track kilometer, STK is a single track kilometer. If you have a kilometer of double track railway, that counts as 2 single track kilometers. It's just when we're talking about infrastructure, building infrastructure, it's useful to measure in kind of per track, because obviously things multiply based on how much kit you're having to hang over the railway. So, what other questions we got? Tom Sedgman, why are some battery and some hydrogen? Right, Tom, what I'd recommend is watching the TDNS episode of this, where we explain that. Although I probably will by the end of this episode again anyway. But in the TDNS episode, we explain why. Basically, it's on distance. The 100-kilometer threshold in the distance the train has to go defines less than that battery, more than that hydrogen. Hydrogen and battery have different applications, essentially. So, here we are, Rail Decarb 21. It's worth giving a little shout out. Actually, these boys' names appear at the end, I think, as well. But in fact, let's whiz to the back. I think it totally does. Yeah, there they are. Just to make sure that they get the double mention. David, Gary, Noel, and Hoops, Paul Hooper. So there they are. Mentioned at the front, kind of appearing at the front. Congrats to all 4 of you. This is and to Rhea for supporting you. It's a really good report, and lots of really juicy data in here that's good fun. Sorry if that screen rolling through the pages really quickly was a bit eye flashy. Sorry about that. Right. Anyway, forward. David Clark from RIA is opening it up. He sort of announces it, asking the question, why electrification? That's the theme. It's why rail electrification? Why is that such a good idea? And that's that's why I've cribbed that for the episode title. So he's kind of outlined the state of play just as I have. RIA's consistently called for rolling program electrification and fleet orders of kind of low carbon self powered rolling stock. Electrification. They're kind of pointing out all the key stuff that we expect to see. The kind of the cancellation because of GWEP. This led to the electrification cost challenge. You've seen all this. I've explained all this, demonstrating that 75% of projects during CP5 had been delivered efficiently, but that successful projects were overshadowed by GWEP and NWEP as well. Actually, those two are pretty horrible. There's the lesson, and the key lesson. This is the point. That electrification cost challenge. The key lesson was that a rolling program of electrification will avoid these problems. A steady volume of activity over the long term, and this report is going to kind of get into it. 1 ton of carbon saved in 2021 means 29 tons saved by 2050. I will explore why that particular statement, why that's true, and explain through that. Anyway, right. So, and also to be fair to David, and this report does allude to the alternatives. It doesn't say electrification at all costs. It does allude to the alternatives that have 2 roles really. One is a transition. You can't, if you want to transition from diesel to electric, electrification doesn't happen immediately overnight. There's time to do all this work. And the other is, as we've talked about, is those fringe situations where you wouldn't prioritise the electrification of the West Highland line, at least for 30, 40 years. So it might happen eventually, but for now, no. Here's a nice picture. And there's a nice picture here saying that electric passenger trains have reduced their emissions by 30% since 2005. That's reference to the fact that basically the grid has decarbonised over that period. And so even the electric trains that you have now, they get more energy efficient without any... In fact, the whole railway network, as we speak, without doing any electrification, gets more energy efficient because releases less carbon, should I say, because we're decarbonising the UK national grid. There's a nice picture of a what is that? Great Western IET. There's some nice mono booms over the top. Are those mono booms? Do those count? Or are they just put regular? Oh, they're just regular 4-track portals. Maybe Gary, tell me off. Right. Anyway, Felix Schmidt from formerly he's Professor Emeritus at BCRRE at the University of Birmingham. He kind of retired recently, didn't he? But he's still chair of the Railway Division of IMechE. He talks about Siemens demonstrating in 1879 that electric trains were a thing. So this is old tech. Siemens have been doing that. Siemens kind of got there first essentially, and Siemens still exist. They're still doing their thing. Nice to point that out. Electrification, future-proof technology. These are all key points. Talking about high speed, intent, the 3 Fs, and hopefully this will come up as well later. The 3 Fs you need to remember from where electrification is vital is fast services, frequent services, or freight services. If either of those three are a thing, you need conventional electrification. Alternative traction won't cut it. Anyway, Felix commends this report. Let's do this thing. Here's the executive summary. Shall I just whiz through the executive summary? We kind of know all the jazz with that. I think we can. So it's just kind of a two-pager, really. We know all that stuff. Let's skip through to the kind of the body of it, shall we? Or shall we? Let's have a look. Gary, you know this report well. If is there any stuff in the any stuff that I need to be paying attention to within the any stuff I need to be paying attention to within the executive summary that's not elsewhere? I'm presuming not. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'll jump back to it now anyway. So, opens up with, I mean, it's all very glossy. It's a lot shinier than the electrification cost challenge report, I'll point out. Good work, Ria, for making it very shiny. I'm pleased about that. There were a few, it was a rough and ready piece of work, the electrification cost challenge, but it did the job. But this is very shiny, and I think, unfortunately, shiny is a good thing and makes politicians pay attention to it. The Climate Change Act, so it talked about the legally binding requirement. Actually, frustratingly, just like a day or two after this report was released, Bojo announced new limitations. I think 75% by 2030, wasn't it? Was that right? Anyone else can correct me on that. Yes. So, the fact that so there's okay, they changed that. Independent of that being changed, there's a requirement for us to and I'm glad they're pointing out a thing which I talk about a lot, is that basically through my entire lifetime, we've reduced our GHG emissions to 58% of 1990 levels, but that's almost entirely from power generation. It's almost entirely from the fact that we've closed a load of coal power stations. That's entirely it. It's not, and as you'll remember, I often say transport has stayed completely flat during that period. Road emissions are the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the UK now, and they have flatlined since my entire life. They have been the same in the UK because engines have got more efficient, but people have bought bigger cars, so cancelled it out. And also, we drive more. 78% by 2030. Thanks, Joseph Harrison. He did make it more strict, Sakura, but unfortunately targets don't necessarily translate into action. Targets seem to be just... anyway, it's another discussion, isn't it? So, am I going to actually say anything useful? Am I going to waffle onwards? So, basically, this first page is outlining the kind of the bigger picture. So the CCC, which is the Climate Change Committee, the UK Committee on Climate Change, they talk about car mileage being reduced by 10% by a shift to active travel and public transport. So it's talking about modal shift being critical. And this is a key point. Electrification is not the route to decarbonisation. Electrification is a useful stepping stone on that route, but only as part of the bigger picture of improving the way that how effective the railways are at moving people and things around. So electrification, in a pure sense of just stopping you burning diesel to drive trains around, isn't the key reason why electrification is important for decarbonisation. And by the end of that, I'll kind of hammer that point home. So this is the key thing: is the CCC talking about driving a shift. So if there's a 10% shift, ignore active travel. If there's a 10% shift to rail, that would require rail to nationally double its capacity at the moment, right? So that's the scale we're talking about. So that's a major increase in the amount of people and things we're moving around. And HGV mileage is a critical part of that. Road HGVs are not going to get electrified as quickly as passenger electric cars are a thing. Gary drives one. He drives a Tesla. Boo. The fact is that electric cars are a thing. Okay, pickup is still very slow. They're still very expensive. Most people can't afford them. Cars are generally the preserve of mid-range income people and above, not lower income people. So it's only part of the mixture. HGVs, no chance. You're not electrifying those anytime soon. So it's really critical that rail picks up the slack. And as we have more ultra-low emission zones appearing in towns and cities, that last mile benefit that you get from a HGV not having to change its load from one vehicle to another gets lost, because HGVs will have to start doing that. As soon as you have HGVs having to exchange, the expensive stuff when you're moving goods around is not basically the moving of the good, it's the transferring it from one thing to another, which is why the shipping container was so successful, because it got rid of that, or a huge amount of that. So that's the expensive thing. So as soon as you have to start shifting goods from, cross-exchanging, interchanging goods from a lorry into a van or whatever it is, the benefits of HGVs diminish massively. At that point, rail needs to be ready to pick up the slack, because the cost efficiencies of having one driver and 80 HGVs or whatever it is become massive. Not to mention the fuel costs and obviously the carbon kind of implications of that. So this is a discussion of potential savings. I think I've put graphs up that look like this as well, where you talk about savings of modal shift and kind of the savings of carbon that those represent. So here's a discussion of modal shift, and this is the key thing that's highlighted. They've already highlighted this early. Rail's greatest contribution to UK decarbonisation is likely to be from modal shift to rail. However, to accept this modal shift, the rail network needs to increase both its capacity to accept it and have sufficient high-performance electric traction to attract traffic from other modes, particularly for freight. These are the key things. Thankfully, what I've just said, reassured that the underlined bit matches what I've just been wittering on about. There's a nice picture of a Class 88 with some container wagons. Shout out to the Rail Freight Group and Maggie Simpson doing the Lord's work on getting as many people to move things by rail, freight by rail as possible. So, permanent solutions to rail decarbonisation. So here we've got a comparison of diesel and electric traction. So what's being said here? So we've got some details in Appendix 1, which we'll get to, because there's some really juicy numbers in Appendix 1. So we've got... continue to at me in for questions, by the way. I'll do my best to kind of pause. I'll try and pause between chapters. In fact, I'll do that now. What questions have we got? What are people saying? Not too many. Remember to at me and it'll appear red, but it's just Ella teasing me about Tesla truck convoys with autopilot solving all of the problems. Yeah, that was my first rail piece, was it? Or my first or second piece for Rail Magazine was about the fact that convoyed electric HGVs are A, FM vaporware, and B, not going to solve most of the problems anyway. So yes, look it up on Medium. It's there to be downloaded and read. So what have we got here? So electric trains' power is primarily limited only by the current that can be drawn from the overhead line or third rail, whereas a diesel train's power is limited by the size of its engine and, critically, its ability to cool the engine. That's kind of the key feature for IETs, is that... the criticality for IETs is that you've got an incredibly powerful engine packaged into a very small space, and essentially the limiting factor isn't so much that you could distribute more power under an intercity express train, the replacements for the high speed, the HSTs. You could package more power underneath them, but you could, because you're limited by space, you couldn't get the heat out of there. It's basic physics equations about how much heat is being generated and has to be dissipated based on the inefficiency of diesel engines. So that is a critical thing. And again, this size of diesel engines, either within a kind of a power pack little mini thing like you have in the Class 755 Stadler things, or more likely an underfloor engine like you've got on Voyagers, Meridians, and all diesel multiple units by and large. You've got underfloor engines. Again, space is limited. Where are we? Let's have a look through this. Diesel engines have unavoidable energy losses as they convert chemical energy into fuel. Yep, absolutely. So I think David Shearer is the master of kind of going through, creating some diagrams explaining this and kind of getting the numbers out. So I think we'll pick through that in the appendix. But the key thing, electric trains are generally 3 times more energy efficient than diesel trains. So that's ignoring the kind of carbon outputs. That's just in terms of energy efficiency, of pure energy efficiency of using the kind of the energy, however you create your electrical energy, because a lot of diesel engines create electrical energy in the train to then power the traction motors. However you do that, they are electric trains are more generally kind of quite a bit more energy efficient than diesel trains. So what else have we got? So we've got, what's it, a nice table, CO2 emission comparison between diesel and electric passenger vehicles, 2009 to 2019. So this is just showing that very kind of, engine things have got more efficient, I think, in the diesel. So there is a bit of a reduction in terms of diesel usage as older trains have been scrapped. Generally, the newer engines have been left in place, so you get an improvement. Although, interestingly, the number of tonnes per vehicle has actually increased. Anyway, so, and also the CO2 per litre, I'm not entirely sure. Other people can maybe fill those gaps in. So, fleet size is, that's just vehicles, the number of vehicles. So you've had a reduction in diesel vehicles, so a reduction in diesel use. Oh, interesting. Okay, so that totally undermines what I've just said. So actually, the emissions have increased, possibly because we're sweating the asset more, and actually the emissions have increased per litre of fuel burned as well. That's interesting. So ignore what I was saying before. That actually efficiency's got worse for diesel. With electric, because the grid's been decarbonised quite substantially, that massive grid decarbonisation, since 60% reduction since 1990, you can see that even over 10 years, there's been quite a tremendous reduction in the amount of CO2 emissions. Trains have got more energy efficient despite being precisely the same trains that they were 10 years ago, as an example, not entirely the case, but yeah. So that's quite a cool fact. Right, so here we are. The lack of such a rolling program. This is just a nice excerpt saying the lack of a rolling program of electrification was one of the main reasons for the Great Western Electrification overrun. I'm glad that RIA are being more bullish, saying no, the whole problem is that you created it as a project, not as a program. Electrification, as with so many things on linear infrastructure, doesn't work as a big hit project. It needs to be a program. It's linear infrastructure. Things kind of it's essentially like a conveyor belt, a kind of a factory production line. It therefore works best as a rolling program, not as a big hit, do it all at once. Ella asks a legit question, which is, what is CO2e? CO2e is CO2 and equivalent gases, so it includes within that methane, other gases that contribute to, so they're normalized. Other gases that contribute to the greenhouse effect, to climate change, are normalized into CO2 as a kind of a broad measure. Yes. Gary's coming in with the definition. Thank you. No, Joseph, it's not emissions. It's equivalent. Yeah. No worry, Joseph. Not a problem. It's not. It's a good question. Gary Keener's pointing out electric trains can also exceed their rated power for short periods without damage, and frequently do. Try that with diesel or hydrogen or battery. That's a nice little tidbit. Thanks, Gary. Right. So let me go through some of these questions because it's appearing. Is there any way the cost of moving freight on and off the rails is cheaper, so it's more appealing to well, yeah, there are lots of ways to do that, but the key thing is that we, on a policy level, introduce ultra-low emission zones that exclude your 40-ton axle load, whatever it is, HGVs, from actually being allowed into that. So as soon as HGVs have to essentially pay their way, also fairer vehicle taxes and kind of road pricing will also solve some of these issues. So yes, we could make things more efficient, but actually, rail freight interchanges are pretty efficient already. So there are always things you can do, but actually, and certainly in terms of a user interface, a customer interface for rail freight, there isn't one. If I decided I had a load of stuff I wanted to ship on by rail, I'd have no idea where to start. There needs to be an easier way to do that. But I think the bigger picture has to be at a broader policy level. The rail industry can only do so much. That broader policy picture has to be that we have ultra-low emission zones being introduced, that we have road pricing that actually more fairly represents the damage that the huge damage that HGVs do to the road. Gareth Williams, is this report available to download anywhere? Yes, it's in the description of this video. You can download it. I'm ignoring Ella's Hyperloop reference. Joseph Harrison asks, if everything's electrified, would it make sense for a standardised 125 mile an hour capable fleet to operate across the entire conventional network once HS2 is built? My gut feeling is yes. But that's kind of rolling stock strategy is another thing that we probably need to get someone in to talk about, because yes, I think ideally you just have a fairly standardized fleet. Okay, it's probably a good idea to have a bit of a mixture of manufacturers to put some redundancy into the system. But basically, you should have specifications that all the trains can accelerate like an electric IET can, that they all comfortably roll along at 125, that they all conform to the same broad standards, that frankly they all provide level boarding, so they should all have lower floors. And yes, you do have a difference between long distance and shorter distance stock, metro stock. So to an extent, yes, but we have to an extent, but I think that partly that should come from standards kind of defining what parameters they fit within. Good question. Will HS2 opening make it easier to schedule conversion of other lines to OLE? To an extent, yes, but mixed on that, because mixed on that. Right, lots of stuff in here. Gary Keener pointing out that CO2 equivalent is a weighted average of all greenhouse gases. There we go. So okay, right. There's lots of detailed technical questions going on there, so which is good stuff. The chat's always fantastic on these. I love it. For those just listening in podcast only form, I'm sorry you miss it. At some point, you have to drop in and enjoy the chat, because it's like another layer on a rail matter. There's always really good discussion going on in the chat, particularly when people like Gary and David and others drop in and offer their expertise and knowledge. So the costs and benefits. This is talking about all huge number, and we talked about this in the TDNS episode, right? Traction decarbonisation network strategy episode. You get electric rolling stock is lighter, it's cheaper, it therefore damages the track less, it's therefore cheaper to lease, it's therefore it has cheaper costs to actually pay to run on the track as well. Reliability is improved for similar reasons. They're just much less complicated machines than diesel locomotives, particularly when you've got multiple units where it's all compacted. You've got a huge amount of heat dissipating. Those fail at a much higher rate than electric units. A good example of this, and again, I got this from David Shearer's. The cost of the Great Western Fleet, the changing cost to the contract of the Great Western Fleet when it moved from being electric only to being bi-mode, it added £1.3 billion to the overall cost of that fleet. Now, bearing in mind what the cost overrun on GWEP was, that £1.3 billion is easily well over the cost it would have been to just electrify everything that those trains were running underneath anyway. So that gives you an idea of the extent to which electrification is a no-brainer when it comes to anything fast, frequent, freight. No-brainer. Electrify it conventionally. Oh, look, here's Noel's graph has reappeared again. Electric trains, cleaner, more powerful traction, provides faster journeys. Yeah, they accelerate much more quickly. The rate of acceleration of IETs in electric versus in bi-mode, kind of diesel mode, is staggering, particularly on routes like Transpennine, where we were looking. I was doing some work in Transpennine and looking at the graphs of the electric IET and the diesel IET. The diesel IET is quite a lot slower than the Class 185, by the way, like dramatically slower than the 185, and it's frankly sluggish. And it's the same when it's in electric mode, pulling away even on the flat. Like the electric train is substantially quicker. Like the acceleration dramatic. They haven't corrected the timetable yet. When's the timetable change happening? Anyone in the chat? But whenever I've been traveling to London a few times this year, pleasingly, and when we've done it, certainly the last trip, we were sat waiting in every station. In a couple of stations, we were waiting for ages just because we'd caught up with the timetable, and we just needed to sort of let the slack disappear. So that slack disappears, more capacity, and that's kind of what electric. So the benefits there in terms of capacity are partly that you can fit more people in an electric train anyway because you haven't got diesel engines, you've got more space, but also you have the fact that they accelerate more quickly means you can squeeze more trains into the same length of track per hour, which is a good thing, right? Deceleration, acceleration, blah, lighter so it can decelerate more quickly as well. David Bump said, presumably the extra 1.3 billion was additional whole life cost. Yeah, it was just varied into the contract, so it was the cost of the diesel engines, the cost of the additional maintenance. Yeah, not fuel, just the cost of new vehicles and maintenance as well. So, since Great Western electrification, electrification programs have been delivered to cost and budget. I've noticed they're saying electrification programs as well. It's interesting. It's important to be clever with language. This is Germany, by the way, and they've just basically rolled on with around 200 single track kilometres of electrification since the forever times. They've just been at it since, I don't know what it was, but slightly before 1968. I don't think we have data, and we're kind of missing data before that. But they're essentially just rolling along with a rolling programme. Arguably, it could be quicker. 200 is quite low. I think we can and do need to do more than that in the UK because we've been, in GB rather, because we've been so bone idle. But anyway, this graph, Noel Dolphin's graph, is terrific. Gary, is there any Republic that you've put on it? You haven't. I think I got a version of it, but just it's very detailed and you have it for your own uses, and I'm annoying you by advertising the fact that it exists. But anyway, there is a graph which is even more detailed, which kind of has the breakdown of Third Rail and which projects now, which I'm sure Gary could, if he hasn't already, Gary could write another piece on it that'll probably end up in Modern Railways rather than Rail, because Roger Ford is a big advocate for electrification, rightly so. Anyway, right, so and to his great credit, I should say, we've looked at all this stuff. Embodied carbon, this is a really key thing, and actually this is a question, I think this is going to answer a question, I hope. Is it going to? Self-powered, I think it's, this is exactly what I'm hoping to. So, Phil Hay raised a good valid question a while back, on the Twitters about does the embodied carbon cost of electrification, the cost of building it, the carbon that you're emitting through journey, through moving them, creating the materials, installing the materials, all the people moving to site to install it, all those embodied emissions, are those going to be, are those actually out, are those cancelled out or better by the benefits that you get? And this is kind of the analysis here. So, The answer is yes, by the way. And it's so the total amount, 13,040 single track kilometers, results in 4.4 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Now, by my calculation, but the overnight, so the carbon savings can be estimated between the differences between the two. So there's kind of looking at how much you'd then save by that level of electrification. So that gives you so the savings from that. So basically annually, you get a saving of just with that electrification, you get, and the current number of trains running, you get a saving of 1.1 or 1.2 million tons. So that means that only in only 4 years, that the carbon costs of electrification are paid back. Only in 4 years, and the program will take a lot longer than that, by the way. So absolutely, it's paid back, easy. So there we go. Given the short payback period derived from this estimate, and that electrification will offer carbon savings for many years, it's reasonable to conclude that the carbon benefits of electrification far outweigh the carbon cost of its provision. I think that's put to bed. Very straightforward. Right, here's a section 3.4, self-powered alternatives to diesel traction. They have a lower efficiency than electric trains. I think the most interesting here is a measure of kind of... let's have a think about this. What's the best? Yeah, by mass... the mass of fuel, or is it by litre, because storage volume is relevant. So this is the comparison of different, so the number of megajoules that you get per litre, comparison of different alternative traction modes. So diesel, you get 36 megajoules per litre. Is that right? Megajoules per litre? Is that right? Wait a minute, let me have a think about that. Is that David? If David's in here, I'm trying to. Is that the right scale? Because that's quite a lot of joules per. Anyway, it might be joules. Anyway, right. Okay. Basically, relatively speaking, it's 36, whereas for hydrogen at realistic pressures, that drops to 5 or 3, depending on different pressures that you can keep the hydrogen at. So 700 or 350 bar. So that's a massive reduction. So for hydrogen at 350 bar, that is it's 10 times more volume required for the same energy output. And a battery pack is even worse. Current battery pack expectation is that you're looking at actually 20 times more volume required for the same energy output. And for kind of the expectation of improved battery technology, you're kind of getting back up towards 10 times more volume. So it's about, what is that, maybe 12, 13 times more volume required than diesel for the same energy output. So diesel is a very efficient way of powering trains if you've made the decision to move your power pack around rather than taking it from the wires. Diesel is very good if you ignore the carbon emissions, obviously, amongst other things. So Gary Keener is saying it is megajoules. Thanks, Gary. Just needed reassuring there. It's been a while since I did A-level physics, and I can't remember quite what I'd be expecting. I was playing with megajoules earlier, which is why I'm, in terms of crashworthiness, which is why I was a little baffled at how large those numbers are. But anyway, yeah. So megajoules per liter. So 36 for diesel, 5 for hydrogen. 3 for hydrogen at current realistic compression, and 2 for battery. 2 megajoules per liter for battery packs. So not great, to be honest. And there's a nice graph down here that kind of explains that and shows that diesel kind of has this little bar here because it doesn't require much percentage of interior coach space to be stored, whereas these numbers, you're looking at kind of current battery technology, you're looking at 15% of the interior coach space being taken up by batteries. That's tremendous. And in terms of the mass, for hydrogen, it's not bad because you're compressing it, so it's fine. For battery packs, it's huge amount of interior coach mass is being taken up by. It's over 100% of the mass of the vehicle. So you're basically doubling the mass of your train. If you're using a battery train, you're doubling its mass. Quite something. So yes, there's lots of good text that we should all read here, but I'm going to go through and picking out the nice, pretty pictures because time. Mike Wooldridge is asking, what's the rough maximum range for the current generation of battery-powered units? It's about 100 kilometers for kind of foreseeable, realistic range for battery trains. The realistic threshold is about 100 kilometers. So battery traction is therefore only suitable for short end-to-end journey distances, limiting its use to branch lines or to enable electric trains to travel for short distances off the electrified network. That's why the TDNS, so the TDNS there is assuming a range of 60 to 80 kilometers before they need recharging. So there you are. Yes, Mike Roldridge, it is answered. The nice big text on here. So even though this is, I've not zoomed in on the page. Hopefully the text is large enough that you can kind of see it. So the kind of a key explicit finding there is not sufficient space to fit traction batteries or store hydrogen within a freight locomotive. Full stop. Freight is not viable using these alternative traction methods. Just absolutely explicitly. That's it right there. There's loads of good detail, lots and lots of really good detail in here. Gary, I hope I'm not underplaying your report too much by skipping over the detail, but I think the things that are pulled out graphically are really valuable for us to talk about, I think. So the TDNS study concluded, well, you've seen it. I put this up on a slide already. It's talking about the percentages. Actually, they've got slightly different numbers here. They've got 86 rather than 85% and 9%. I think that's because they've attributed the 2%, which had a question mark on it, to both hydrogen and normal electrification, which is fair enough. So they've kind of attributed those the 2%, kind of halved it between those two. Comparing battery hydrogen and diesel traction. Diesel traction has poor performance and efficiency compared with electric traction, provides sufficient power to operate intensive fast passenger service and heavy freight trains. So we know this, that we're not replacing diesel on a technological level necessarily. This is where we talk about the fact that the decarbonisation agenda provides that final oomph to make the point about why diesel needs to go. It's the bigger picture stuff. A modern railway shouldn't be running with diesel anyway. The particulates that are being pumped out, the noise, all these features as well. Other things that people talk about, though, are as kind of some of the transitory kind of technologies. Biofuels is one. Now, I am massively sceptical about biofuels for a variety of reasons that aren't, I don't think, talked about here. For similar reasons that I'm massively sceptical about carbon offsetting. Carbon offsetting is a pseudoscience. If you get a menu that says, like I did recently actually, where were we? We got a menu and it said we had our menu had been offset. Basically, the carbon had been offset in our meal by a certain amount. Oh yeah, we're down in Derbyshire. Carbon had been offset in our meal, and we paid a bit towards that. It was like, oh well, fine. If we paid a bit towards some planting trees, fine. I don't mind that. But don't talk about it as if you're annulling carbon that you've emitted into the atmosphere. Carbon offsetting is a pseudoscience, and the idea of the fact that people trade for carbon, it's just nonsense. It's absolutely damaging nonsense. Anyway, biofuels. Let's forget my prejudices on biofuels. Let's have a look at biofuels. There's a potential chance that biofuels can be burnt in existing diesel engines. Production of such fuels can have large indirect land use emissions, absolutely, particularly for vegetable oil-based biofuels, double absolutely. Biofuels result in invariably end up with third world countries swapping out crops that people survive on, subsistence crops, with these cash crops for biofuels. This is very, very bad. We should not be doing this. Again, there are lots of things the CCC does that I don't agree with. They over-rely on electric vehicles. They also suggest that biofuels can play a significant role in meeting long-term climate targets. I fundamentally disagree with that assertion, and I'm glad to see that RIA are kind of refuting that point. And so they're kind of going into some detail about that. Biofuels, bad, very bad. Anyway, more importantly, let's have a look at freight locomotives. The report on biofuels, by the way, is more nuanced. Let's have a look at freight locomotives. How am I doing in terms of... There's more report to go, by the way, and it's already 7 minutes to. It's running on a bit longer than I expected it to. Well, there's a surprise, eh? Richard Smith is saying, what about nuclear-powered trains? Well, Network Rail have a policy of sourcing as much of their electricity as possible from nuclear because it's reliable, it's clean, which means that most of our electric trains are nuclear trains, actually. Nuclear-powered trains. So this is kind of running through the discussion we've had already, actually. Yeah, so Class 92 electric locomotive has twice the power of a Class 70 diesel. Expanding the electrified network to make greater use of such electric trains would promote freight modal shift from the resultant faster freight trains and reduce delays to passenger trains. Major. And I think their discussion, we've got an entire fleet, a huge fleet of diesel locomotives that are going to get swapped out. Sorry, I'm just noticing John Christoph, who friend of the show, saying mild quibbling with characterization of carbon offsets as pseudoscience, but absolutely correct. They're extremely misguided policy. Yeah. So there's some work that was done by the Rail Freight Group. I can't remember the name of the chap. He presented at the launch of the campaign to electrify Britain's railways and laid out a fantastic presentation showing how little. Not a huge amount of electrification is required to do a lot of infill that results in a massive shift a kind of shift of the balance between needing a diesel freight locomotive fleet to an electric freight locomotive fleet. And bearing in mind, as I was saying a second ago and forgot, the Class 66 is up for is kind of discussions are happening now about how those are going to be renewed. We should not be renewing the Class 66 with a like-for-like diesel Coco. It should be an electric Coco that replaces it, or at least an equivalent powerful Bobo for the traction engineers on here. Yes, so yeah, basically, so that's like a fundamental thing. We need to electrification enables that fleet to be swapped out with a far more efficient, far more powerful, far lighter fleet. So there we go. Oh, yeah, sorry. So here we are. So yeah, the CILT have done that work. Yeah, the Rail Freight Forum. Sorry, it wasn't the Rail Freight Group. It's the CILT's Rail Freight Forum has concluded just 500 route miles of electrification are needed, and 70% of UK rail freight could then be electrically hauled. And there's a nice sort of diagram kind of showing some of these things here, which is nice. Right, next chapter, and we're only at 5 to 8. Hooray! I need to stick more to the graphics, right? It's the Julian Worth map. Julian Worth, of course, Julian Worth. Thank you. Thanks, Gary. Out of the 89% electrification, I presume that the majority of that is OLE. Yeah, it's almost all OLE. There is some third rail traction to electrification to happen down in the southeast, which makes sense on a short-term basis. We've got bigger fish to fry than quibbling over a few little gaps in an area that's already understood in terms of risk. So, transitional solutions. So this is a section I whizzed through here, but it's kind of pointing out that firstly, we need to be deploying battery and hydrogen trains as early as possible. We need to not be dithering on these because we will need them in places, and they need to be proven technology. We need to have the critical mass of them being proven technology. I'm actually writing a piece on hydrogen trains, which I'll talk a little bit about what's going to be happening next with those. But spoiler alert, it's happening soon. It's just waiting on government. Once again, we're waiting on government to press the fund button on that. But everyone's ready to go. All the people involved are ready. Alstom, Northern are all ready to go on that scheme. Right, so bimode, it's talking about traction flexibility can help the transition. Their diesel engines mean they cannot ultimately be part of a zero-carbon railway. So I think that diesel electric bimodes have a major part to play. A diesel rolling stock, diesel passenger trains are still far more efficient than, far less carbon intensive than people driving around. So modal shift is still to rail is still positive. So in the meantime, the bimode trains that we have now are part of the picture for the kind of the short to medium term. Hybrids and dual fuel. This is talking about kind of adding extra kind of generator sets and sort of kind of resulting in these sort of hybrid operation. That's all of these options are there, but they are transition technologies. All right, here we go. So research and innovation. This is an absolutely critical point, and we're going to get to the conclusion of the report later, where they kind of hammer this point home. Let's see. Let me go. We've got lots of questions. Let's have a look. Next timetable change 16th of May. Thanks, James P. Ella's talking about the class 92, which is actually double the weight it needs to be because it's got a huge amount of system redundancy because it had to run through the channel. I presume yes, because channel. So the 92 can be even lighter. Absolutely. David Shepherd, should a rolling electrification program be led by old train stock or highest number of train movements? Oh, that's a question that actually I think the high-speed rail group have done some, or high-speed rail industry leader or rail industry leaders north, or one of these various a million groups that there are, have done some work in prioritizing, in deciding on prioritization. Ultimately, it's going to be a mixture of political decision and practicality and fleet expiry. There's not one thing. There's no we should do it this way, we should do it that way. There's a big picture to understand quite how you prioritize. Lots of different things. I think rolling stock expiry is going to be a key part of that. John Christoph, regarding the Class 66s, would you make any distinction at all for swapping out their prime movers for ones with a higher emissions rating than the old EMD 710s they're getting? I think part of the discussion is that that has been excluded as a possibility by Caterpillar. I think that's part of the issue, is that you can't squeeze any more of an efficient engine within that space. I think I might be corrected on that. Joseph Harrison, was Northern's decision to refurbish their Sprinters rather than at least replace them with 195s utterly stupid? Yes or yes? No comment. Well, I think Sprinters had a little bit of extra life in them that needed to be squeezed out. I think there was enough issues with rolling stock introduction and the rolling stock supply chain being squeezed desperately to not worry about kind of doing it with trains that were kind of halfway through their life as well. Right, critical thing here. Whilst research and innovation can contribute much to rail decarbonisation, it's important to understand the limitations. This whole chapter is basically going to say, stop suggesting that electrification is somehow going to be skipped by some magical, wondrous FM technology. No, fundamentally, the technology that makes electric trains good now is the same technology that made electric trains good in 1879. It's the fact that you're taking the power source out of the train. You can generate that power any way you like. Ultimately, the system to get the power into the train is a mechanical system, Gary being an expert on that stuff. Yes, so research cannot, e.g., change the laws of nature or properties of materials. Yeah, this is some of the fine work. Research cannot, for example, change the laws of nature or the physical properties of materials, Captain. Some of David Shepherd is in the chat. Dave Shearer's finest work there. Yes, it's a good Star Trek quote. Much love. Anyway, what was I waffling on about before? Oh yeah, the mechanical system of which Gary designs in the chat now. That mechanical system. Yes, you can change materials, but fundamentally, that mechanical system is doing precisely the same job that it was doing in the earliest catenary systems. You know, it's a tension system to make sure that you've always got contact, that you're never going to pull that. You're not the pantograph designed such that it picks up that contact. You design the system to smoothly go across the head of the pantograph, so you get even wear. You design it so it doesn't hook over and pull the wires down. All these things are the same mechanical things that were happening to be done in the first catenary systems long ago, and it just happens to be that we have new materials. We can be clever about the way we do things. We can tension things more cleverly. We can create lighter systems. All these sorts of tech that Gary could go on about in the chat, and indeed might well do for a while, if you prod him about it. So yes, technology might be out there, but fundamentally we've already established that batteries. We're talking about orders of magnitude less, and it kind of. Orders of magnitude more volume being occupied in a train, doubling the mass of a train. Current technology, we're not, and anytime soon, gonna somehow make it that having the power pack on the train, having the power station's worth of energy on a train is better than not having that power pack of energy on the train. That's never going to. You're never going to best the fact that having the energy, having a power station not on the train is better than having it on the train. Nothing will ever change that. As you can't change the laws of physics, Captain, as David Shearers has pointed out. Borislav, isn't battery production quite unethical? Yeah, absolutely. That might well change, but at the moment it absolutely is. So there we go. That's a key thing. So if you've got the likes of Grant Shapps saying you never know, we might skip electrification, that's why we're not doing it on East West Rail, then throw that line at him, and also ideally some smelly socks and maybe the odd rotten piece of fruit. There we go. And the other thing is, however you generate the electricity is a fundamentally going to change. How you generate that electricity, we can rely on any magical type of energy generation we like, tidal, fusion, people on bicycles. However we want to generate that energy, we can do it. But fundamentally, it's getting pumped into the same wires no matter what. So all that technology can develop wonderfully. Happy days. Richard Smith asks, how much work will need to be done on the national grid and power supply being a key point to support nationwide electrification? Will this produce any kind of limiting factor on such a program? Yeah, I think it will. A key point that does get forgotten by a lot of people in all of this is not just the OLE kit, but the power supply. You need to upgrade the power supply massively to enable all the new trains to run. Even on existing electrified sections, not just the future stuff where you need to put the power supply in. Frustratingly, power supply upgrade on the East Coast Main Line has been de-scoped to just satisfy the needs of the current foreseeable timetable. With only like a marginal increase in capital cost, we could have foreseen it to the middle of the century. Stupid decisions are always being made based on short-sightedness, aren't they? Reduce capital cost at all costs? No, don't do that. Think about the future. Look at whole life costs, please, for goodness sake. Money is free, particularly for capital expenditure. So here's hydrogen trains, talking about the technology. So we don't need to look in great detail at the technology. This is a really interesting breakdown in the way that technologies can advance. So this is looking at hydrogen. The key technology is really hydrogen compression, and there are some challenges about how that might work, so that's broken down a bit. Looking at improvements in battery range making a difference to the pointing out that even if there are improvements in battery range, it's unlikely to make any particular difference to the conclusions of the TDNS. These are the projections. The UK's Advanced Propulsion Centre is kind of providing broadly looking at the car industry and their transition to net zero, and looking at technologies of batteries and their projections about the improvements that we might see in density and therefore in range. And they're pretty menial, in honesty. Yes, great for cars. As I often say, electric cars are the future for cars, but cars are not the future of travel. So it's some really valid points pointed out there. And then I think generally you've got technology. We've already got technologies actually making electrification better. Gary, we talked about those the last time we were on the last time Gary was actually on the episode. We talked about new kind of insulating material paint that you can put on the underside of a bridge. We talked about surge arresters. We talked about some of these technologies that allow you to reassessment of OLE gradient rules. There is another good example. Better modelling is allowing us to be to be more efficient, more clever with the way that we do electrification. This is offering huge opportunities. There we are. So there's all sorts of nice snazzy stuff here. Reducing cost of new feeder stations because they don't require a net connection to high volt. Look at this. So I didn't even know about that. That's quite. So that's on the power supply side. So there's technology, great leaps and bounds going on there. There we are. Riding Sunbeams project showing that there are potentials for solar panels directly connected to the electrification system. Yeah, riding a kind of. Lee and the good work being done there. I think I appeared on a radio thing talking about this, and so the fact that the idea there was a discussion about can you have solar powered trains and that'll be wonderful. And I was like, well, no, you don't stick your solar power panels on the train. That's stupid. What you do is you stick your solar panels onto the next to the railway or just broadly as part of the grid mix. But that's how solar is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It's a good way to generate electricity. Pump it into the grid, but also if you're shoving a load of solar panels on the roof of stations or whatever, or you develop see-through glass that is also, difficult because part of it has to be absorbed. But anyway, whatever snazzy solar panel technology you invent, shoving it around on the railway estate is a good way to pump more electricity into the industry as well. I'm just going to point out this guy's plastic bag here. Is that like a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's bag there? Nice work. I like that. I hope that there's just some lunch in there. That'd be really good. Anyway. Conclusions, right? This is the exciting bit. There are 8 conclusions, all of which are very, very excellent and good, and we're going to talk about each one in turn now, fairly rapidly. Quickfire, 6.1. So conclusion 1, the use of electricity either by electric trains that use it as it is generated or by storing it on battery and hydrogen trains is the only traction option for rail decarbonisation. Incontrovertible. Conclusion 2. The contribution of biofuels to rail decarbonisation will at best be limited to a small transitional or residual role. So, too long didn't read, forget biofuels. Conclusion 3. Electric trains are a unique technology in that they can use electricity as it is generated to offer high-powered net zero carbon transport. They are the only decarbonisation option for rail freight and for rail passenger services requiring high speed and high power for other than short distances. So rail decarbonisation requires, this is like the logic step. If you want rail decarbonisation, you need a large-scale electrification program. That's the incontrovertible truth of the matter. Conclusion 4. Electric trains are future-proof since research and innovation cannot change the inherent features that give them greater power, range, efficiency, and lower operating costs than self-powered traction. Absolutely. Conclusion 5. UK Rail's greatest potential contribution to UK decarbonisation is accepting passenger and freight traffic from less carbon-friendly modes of transport. Modal shift. Attracting traffic from other modes requires high-powered traction, which for most passenger services and all freight services requires conventional electrification. Conclusion 6. Cost-effective electrification is best delivered as part of a rolling programme. Innovations are reducing the cost of electrification as well. This will further improve its already positive business case when delivered at current electrification costs, as shown in the TDNS. The penultimate conclusion 7, the UK rail decarbonisation strategy must consider how best to incentivise modifications of existing diesel traction to reduce carbon emissions pending electrification. So that's basically the government are about to theoretically publish their decarbonisation strategy, and they need to understand how to incentivise the modification of those existing diesel trains, however that is done. And then the final conclusion, which answers Philip Hayes' question from a few months back. The carbon benefits of electrification far outweigh the embodied carbon arising from the provision of an electrified railway. There you are. Easy. 8 conclusions, all very neat and tidy. Richard Smith asks, does this report talk about Northern Ireland railways? Yes. The reason it says UK rail decarbonisation there is because it is a UK strategy by government. That's the name of their strategy. But I have a sneaking suspicion that the UK government strategy is actually just looking at England and Wales, because Scotland it's entirely transport's devolved in Scotland. It's kind of hybrid devolved in Wales, and it's devolved in Northern Ireland. So actually, they just mean England, really. But they are saying UK because to a lot of people currently in government, the UK and England are the same thing. Right, there's a nice picture of a Class 385. That's a good train right there, even if they did slightly screw up the front windscreens. These, by the way, are incredibly kind of reliable trains. They've got very high reliability. Right, so the appendices. I'm not going to go through these in detail and pick through. What I'm going to do is point out where you can go to find the information. So if you get this report, you can flick through and get, screenshot these, whatever it is, screen capture these graphs and use them on Twitter or whatever you happen to do. So the first graph is the one that I often use, which shows the different emissions, the different sectors and their CO2 emissions for the UK. You can see that you've got what is this? This is annual emissions. Actually, you can see that there's one there which is industry. Is that the industry one that's seeming to drop? I'm not quite sure how they've measured that up, but basically, because my industry one comes out much lower when I use it. Anyway, I have to double check quite how they've accounted for that. In any case, the yellow one there is energy generation, and you can see that's the one that's dropped by a substantial amount. So that's some nice stuff. There's some nice general. So this is the challenges and solutions UK decarbonisation. This is the kind of the broad brush stuff. This is looking at this table here. The figure 7 here is detailing the breakdown of electricity generation, how it gets created in terms of terawatt hours, and then sort of looking at hydrogen. So in 2018 it was all from reforming. And then in 2050, it's envisioned that you have some electrolysis, but the majority will be from reforming with carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage, by the way, a technology that's been defunded by the current government and remains a little bit of an FM technology. It does exist, but there's only one power station globally, I think, that's had proper carbon capture and storage installation. Basically, it's one of those. There was a good report that was released. What was that? Written recently that I shared. Thunberg had shared it. She had shared it, and it was really worth a read. And talked about the fact that CCS is another one of these FM solutions that's not really got any major application. It's talked about a lot, but hasn't happened yet. So that's Appendix 1. Is kind of the big picture. Appendix 2 is talking about modal shift. These are sort of graphics that I've created, similar ones of these. So you might have seen the Permanent Rail Engineering versions of these. These are a bit more nicely square, actually. Fair play. So this is talking about 2017. This is talking about the data when it was available in 2017. 2017 versus 2018, that might need to be 20. Anyway, it's 2017-18, I think. And then it's looking at if you had modal shift. So from air from road only 4% and from 20% from air, and sort of talking about what that impact is on reducing emissions and how that looks at sort of savings. But obviously that requires a massive leap in capacity. Where are we? Joseph, Gary, thanks for your advice. Joseph, Joseph, do you think maglev has the potential to be added into the mix of mass transit providers? No. So what's the next? So then we've got. So this is talking about increase in rail passenger. This is quite a nice breakdown. I remember this. So this is talking about scenarios of the way that passenger traffic might change given different alterations in, given different mode share shifts. So if you've got a 10% shift from car traffic, you've got an increase in rail passenger traffic of 84%. So nearly double. And then if you include HGVs within that, you're looking at potentially doubling or more of the need of rail capacity requirements. That doesn't just evenly flatly work across the whole network. Obviously, that it works in greater intensity in some places and lesser in others. That's potentially something to explore in great detail in the future. Maybe the Network 2050 work that's going on in the background of the Discord server might be able to look at some of that in more detail in the future. But anyway, broadly, you're looking at a doubling of rail capacity needing to be achieved by the middle of this century. Yeah, relatively minor modal shift from road transport would result in nearly 40% more rail passenger traffic. This is a point that is made constantly. So if you hear all the COVID haters and naysayers, whack them over the head with this. For goodness sake, the idea that COVID is going to result in a long-term reduction in rail travel is just for the birds. We did that in another episode, didn't we? Right, Appendix 3. This is just a comparison of traction modes. This is really good. I like this. So this is looking at different traction types, looking at the ratio of electric to diesel in terms of power, and consumption. So the ratio. So for a freight loco, you need what's the way to in terms of energy efficiency. I think this is looking at. So yeah, a really nice little table detailing there. So you've got, double kind of electric is more than twice as efficient. Similar passenger loco, multiple unit, slightly reduced, high-speed train per coach. There's just some very interesting sort of breakdowns there about high-speed is actually quite an efficient way to move a diesel engine. Like diesel high-speed trains are not bad actually, but that's kind of part of that for now in terms of efficiency. Obviously, electric is good and better for all the reasons previously discussed. Oh, serious performance benefits. There's some examples of maintenance per mile of a diesel vehicle is 60p, electric vehicle 40p, fuel per mile, diesel vehicle 47p, electric vehicle 26p, lease per annum. Actually, they're not that dissimilar. 110,000 for diesel and 90,000 for electric. Track wear per mile. Again, they're not. I'm surprised at that. I'm interested to know. I'd be interested to look at. I think the TNS came up with slightly different conclusions in terms of numbers there, but yeah. No, Gary, any steering going to go on? No, it's power, not efficiency. Thanks, Gary. No, it's power. So it's the amount of extra power these things have in the previous graph. Sorry. Freight. This is what, Gary, I'm so glad you're on, correcting all of my glaring errors. So sorry, that's those numbers there are about power. So per coach, it's about power. So basically, broadly across the bench, you've got an electric vehicle. Electric train has double the power of a diesel one. Thanks, Gary. That feels obvious now. I've said it out loud. Viva Rail produces the only battery trains currently approved for passenger use in the UK. So there's a nice little sort of sample here. So they give kind of 30 to 40% energy reserve capacity, 130 kilowatt hours of useful energy, which means that they have a range of 60 to 80 kilometers. That's assumed and detailed in the TDNS study. So it's Viva Rail, a really interesting case study there, explaining what they're capable of. Then hydrogen trains. Currently, the only one that's capable of running is the Breeze units, these Alstom Breeze units, which we've had on. I'll really annoy Alex Burrows now for saying this. Yeah, I mean, okay, we might see the Porterbrook / BCRE, one of my employers. So I'm going to get sacked now. Well, their proposals, we might see those appearing, and I'm in the process of organising an interview to find out exactly where they're at, but they're further behind than Alstom are, frankly. Alstom and Eversholt are further ahead. Porterbrook are a little bit further behind, which is fine, they'll get there. The key thing holding them back is lack of government interest in any of this. Despite the fact that, there's a good news report that I should have put in the news saying that hydrogen has been mentioned, like hydrogen as a power source has been mentioned hundreds of times in Hansard, because there's to an extent the fossil fuel industry is pushing hydrogen as its new way of making, of its new gas that it's going to make all its penny off, even though it gets to charge more per whatever it is per unit. Anyway, that's another discussion for another day. Here's some stuff about loading gauge they talk about, and here's some of the David Shearer specials. So the discussion of efficiency. So taking electricity from the grid, the process of electrolysis, 70% efficient, the compression, which is 91% efficient, then into the fuel cell, which is 60%, it's a 60% efficient fuel cell, then the converter and drive 89%, which means that hydrogen is only 34% efficient as a system, which is rubbish, absolutely rubbish. It has its place, as we've said, but it is not a hugely efficient way to move stuff around. If that's the sacrifice we make for the rural lines, fine in the medium and maybe even the longer term, but not indefinitely. Anyway, there we go. So there's some stuff to talk about the fact that the infrastructure is pretty expensive as well. There's a picture of Hydroflex, Porterbrook and Birmingham. They're testing it in a... Yeah, anyway, there's the Hydroflex. They're running it back and forth. It does run... I mean, they got there first in terms of the test case vehicle, I'll just point out. So they were moving it around, but the Alstom one... Alstom been running the Island for longer. It was just about squishing it into the UK loading gauge. So they're both ahead and behind in different aspects. I don't have a favourite of either of them, I'm just to point this out before I get shouted at. Gary calls this part of the chat, reality doesn't suit our needs, let's invent fuels. Yes, this is indeed the part of the discussion. Yes, all of these alternative potential things. So Appendix 4 is a really good one because it shows how rubbish the UK is in terms of its the carbon intensity of our network. We think we lord it over the Americans so much, but we have a look at our CO2 equivalent grams per passenger kilometre, and we are second only to the US when it comes to these big emitting companies, countries. I'd be interested to look at some of the other European countries, but they are so heavily electrified compared to us that their passenger kilometre CO2 emissions are much lower. And you have a look at the reason for that is this next figure is the breakdown of the way that stuff moves around. So yellow is bad, that's the diesel, and electric is the bluey purpley color. So you can see the USA just all diesel. And a huge amount of the light yellow is freight, and then a tiny little fraction of passenger. It's all diesel. But given that, look at us. We are still a huge amount of passengers are moved around by diesel, and then obviously we've got less of an overall share of freight, which is why that light color is so small. But that's all. Pretty much all freight is diesel haulage, and we've got a good chunk of passenger being hauled by electric. But it's squashed. The overall picture is ruined by the amount of diesel that we still run. Really nice kind of picture to end on, I think, there. 20 minutes overrun. Gareth Williams, what about wind-powered trains? Surely did not beyond the realms of man to affix sails onto locos? I think there was someone who did have one of those, like, squeaky things, and they tried to attach a sail to it. I mean, obviously it's a ridiculous suggestion. Joseph Harrison, sincere question. Trains can now reach 250 miles an hour. Is that the limit, or is there potential to get faster? Oh, what? That's kind of a random query. I'd recommend Googling the 474 kilometer an hour conventional steel rail world record holding attempt. So yeah, we can nearly get to 500 kilometers an hour with modern trains. So yeah, speed isn't so much of an issue. It's the relevance, the need for that speed that becomes a bigger question. Anyway, right, enough of that. Let's go back to our slides and this. The slides. Let's go back to our slides and go back to this point here. I'm going to get rid of my face. You don't need to see my face. This is the kind of the concluding remarks I have. I basically have for this, which is we got sent these out to sort of send. Yes, I am quoting myself here. Don't laugh. The point is, it's kind of my neat thing that I kind of go on and on about, and I want it to stick eventually. Which is that Britain's rail capacity needs to double by the middle of this century, and without a widespread rolling program of electrification, this increase simply is not possible. We were all sent out these cards by Rail Industry Association to kind of push the message, make the report widely known. I'm always naughty. I changed the picture from an IET to a freight train because, freight trains don't get their representation. I also downloaded the correct font to make sure this thing in the top corner appears properly. Big shout out to Max Sugarman. I'm doing the work for you. 574, not 474. Oh yeah, it's 574. It's nearly 600 kilometers an hour. Thanks, Gary. You make me feel like I speak absolute nonsense the whole time. Anyway, right. So, Matt Reed, you ask the key question. Matt Reed asks, will any action be taken due to this report? Will it be taken seriously? One would like to think so. But I ain't holding my breath. I really am not holding my breath. Michael C. asks, can the doubling of capacity be achieved purely with HS2, HS3 and electrification, or are other projects needed as well? No. HS2, HS3, high-speed rail plus electrification are just part of the picture. You need a lot of local passenger upgrades. You need better bus services to feed into rail. You need better urban transport to feed into rail. You need lots of regional railway projects. You need all the upgrades to the East Coast Main Line. When I'm talking about upgrades, I mean signalling projects, all these sort of things. There's a lot that the existing railway needs to still have done to it to enable that to happen. It's not just a case of HS2. There's a lot of work still need to be done on the network. Track renewals, bridge replacements, all these things on a major scale need to still happen. Anyway, right, that's enough of that. That's the conclusion. Rail capacity needs to double by the middle of the century. You need a rolling pillar of electrification to achieve that. Full stop. I said that very quickly, but I think you get the point. So, thanks for listening, if you did so in podcast form. Available on all good podcasting platforms. I don't know why I say this to people. Either you know this already and you're watching it, and so you're watching it, so you don't need to listen to it in podcast form, or you're listening to this already and you're hearing me say this, which means you found it already. So is it daft that I talk about this? I don't know. I like this slide because it's got many colours and it's a useful kind of windbreak between the body and then the outro section. What else? The Patreon stuff. Patreon.com/GarethDennis is where you can support me to keep doing this stuff. As we're getting further away from lockdowns and or closer to the end of lockdowns and summer is raining, I have less evening time, so I this is my own time that I take to set these things up, and so the Patreon stuff allows me to kind of justify my time on that. All the chat happens on the Discord. If you want to get involved in stuff, such as, for example, the Network Rail Network Rail. Network 2050 project. You're now employees of Permanent Rail Engineering / volunteers, sort of indentured servitude type affair. Thanks to all of you who are volunteering and getting involved in that. It's really good. Lots of nice pro bono stuff. Ella, I don't need new kit. I've got all the kit, right? Surely. And also PayPal if you just want to go for like small money chucking, that if you don't want to commit to anything long term. Oh, very brief thing. So I never normally plug this, but this week we've reached an interesting milestone in the Archipelago series. Also, it's happening on Thursday, not Friday, like it normally does. It's reduced down to one a week because sunny outside and exercise reasons. But we've finally reached the point of grouping on our Archipelago. So if you're interested in what the hell I'm talking about, then join this next tomorrow night. Should be interesting. Next week. What is this project Lewis Cott is asking about? Go into the Discord and ask about it. You'll find it. Episode 61. We're going to be talking about buses. It's another page turn. Some people, not everyone I talk to likes these, but I've never seen anyone say they don't like the page turns. There's just lots of interesting reports out there, and it's fun to kind of go through them and sort of see how they fit into the bigger picture. And I really want to go through this one. We are going to get bus experts on in the future, but I figured to allow me to kind of talk freely about this one, I'll go through this report myself. It was out quite a while ago, and it's interesting. It's an interesting thing. I have had a detailed read through it now, actually, so it won't be the first time I've looked through it when I'm with you all. But it's good, actually. There's lots of good stuff in there. I wanted to get angry about it, but didn't, because it is actually a good document. I'm sure there are things that could be better in it, and others might come in the chat and describe it, but it's a good document. I want to go through it and talk about it. So buses, Lewis Cott, Romy Adkrat. Yes, you did used to drive these. Right. Also remember, go vote tomorrow. That's like a key thing. Go vote, everyone. Absolutely, go vote, everyone. Let's go big face. So there are some questions. Hello, everyone. I'm slightly less pink. The lights seem to be balancing up quite nicely for once. David Shepherd is repeating the question: is it better to use solar power OLE or power stations? Solar power OLE or power stations? Absolutely indifferent. It's from an efficiency perspective, I think having a grid, just putting renewable power into the national grid is the right thing to do, and then that in turn powers the OLE. Matt Reed asks if I'm going to talk about the misguided busway in Cambridge next week. I don't know if I will, actually, because we'll see. It might get talked about tangentially, but broadly, I think we'll be talking about kind of the organisation of buses, the ownership, or at least the operating model for those. Ella, I've got Wacom. It's here. Look, Wacom. There is the Wacom, everyone. Wacom. Feel free to send me a refund for this one since I'm now plugging it. Look, there's the stick. It's nice. It's a nice unit. Anyway, right. Enough of that. So, I've wittered on for half an hour longer than I should have because it's supposed to be an hourly thing. Thanks everyone for sticking with it. I think that's all the questions covered off. Only really remains for me to sort of say, wave inanely at you all as I say cheerio. Cheerio, everyone. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for correcting all my errors, Gary. Cheerio.